So please have a pencil and some paper out to jot down some notes as you go through this presentation, because you are going to be submitting a writing assignment at the end of this as evidence that you watched the entire video. All right, let's talk about the Incas. So about the same time that Christopher Columbus landed at the tiny island in the Caribbean Sea, Capac, a powerful emperor and warrior, was battling to expand his empire thousands of miles to the south in what is now Ecuador and Colombia. He and his father and grandfather had fought to create an empire that at its peak extended over a vast area along the rugged Andes Mountains of South America. Probably the largest nation in the world at the time, the Inca Empire was suddenly conquered by a small band of Spanish soldiers in 1532. The Inca people originated in the Cusco Valley of what is now modern-day Peru in about 1000 AD and gradually conquered the neighboring tribes. The empire expanded rapidly under 3 Inca emperors between 1438 and 1527 until at its height it stretched from what is now the border between Colombia and Ecuador to center Chile, a distance of over 3,400 miles. At its height, the Inca people, who numbered only about 100,000, ruled from 10 to 12 million people from at least 86 ethnic groups with their own languages, traditions, and religious beliefs. The entire empire encompassed wildly contrasting geographic regions ranging from towering snow-capped mountains to coastal deserts to Amazonian jungles. The heart of the empire, centered around Cusco, was located at such a high elevation that people unaccustomed to high altitude suffered from altitude sickness, which includes headaches, fatigue, dizziness, and upset stomach. The empire was often plagued with a variety of natural disasters, including earthquakes, volcanoes, droughts, and devastating floods. The Spanish conquistadors, or conquerors, came to what they called the New World in search of gold. Francisco Pizarro, who first came to the Americas in 1502, had heard rumors of a land filled with gold to the south of Mexico. He and a small band of Spanish soldiers landed on the shores of what is now Ecuador in 1531. They had arrived in Tahuantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters, known to us as the Inca Empire. When Pizarro and his men arrived in the Inca capital of Cusco, they saw a splendid city with palaces, halls, and temples made of huge stones, carefully fit together without mortar. Most incredible of all were the temples decorated with gold, silver, and precious jewels. The most important temple was at Coricancha, or House of the Sun, dedicated to the Inca sun god named Inti. Its walls and doorways were covered with gold, both inside and out. One building within the complex contained a large statue of the sun, made of solid gold and embedded with precious stones. More fantastic still was the garden. A Spanish eyewitness, Pedro de Chiesa de Leon, describes the site as follows. They also had a garden, the clods of which were made of pieces of fine gold, and it was artificially sown with golden maize, and the stalks, as well as the leaves and cobs, being that of metal. They had more than 20 golden sheep, llamas, with their lambs, and the shepherds with their slings and crooks to watch them, all made of the same metal. Early Spanish observers described the Andean people as well-fed, healthy, and clean. When the Spanish arrived, the Inca emperor and his assistants supervised a highly organized government that controlled an area of 135,000 square miles. The Spanish must have been surprised to learn that the Inca Empire ran very efficiently without 3 inventions considered essential by Europeans: writing, money, and the wheel. How was the Inca Empire able to organize such a vast area and produce enough wealth to provide basic necessities to its people and support a lavish lifestyle for the Inca nobility and priests? The answers lie in many ways the Inca devised to take advantage of their diverse environment. The Andes, the second highest mountain chain in the world, created an environment of extreme climate and weather conditions. Mountain ranges are created when the continental plates slide under each other, creating pressure that lifts and squeezes the land above them, like a tablecloth being pushed up by a heavy plate. The mountain range was created over a period of millions of years, as the plate under the Pacific Ocean had been sliding eastward under the South American plate, raising the mountains and creating a deep trench off the coast. The constant grinding causes severe earthquakes. In the mountainous terrain, earthquakes can cause mudslides and avalanches. For example, in May of 1970, a devastating earthquake followed by avalanches and mudslides killed 70,000 people in the central Andes. This earthquake loosened a huge block of ice that caused a landslide which buried an entire town, killing 4,000 people. Periodic volcanic eruptions have also claimed the lives of thousands. The region's climate is influenced by water and air currents that flow north from Antarctica along the Pacific coast. The ocean current, called the Peru or Humboldt Current, brings extremely cold but nutrient-filled water to the surface, supporting a rich supply of fish, birds, and sea mammals. But the cold Peru current causes clouds to release moisture before they reach land, creating one of the driest deserts in the world along the west coast of South America. The winds, cooled by the Peru current, then warmed by the coastal plains, did not precipitate enough water to produce significant amounts of rain until they rise high into the Andes, where rain falls seasonally in the mountain valleys of the western slope. On the eastern slopes, on the other hand, equatorial winds blowing from the east over the Amazon River hit the mountains, cool and produce large amounts of rain. The well-watered eastern slopes of the Andes support lush tropical vegetation as they drop to the Amazonian basin. At irregular intervals, a warm ocean current runs along the Peruvian coast, pushing the Peruvian current further west. This current, called El Niño, causes heavy rain in the desert coastal areas and drought in the southern Andes. In 1982, the worst El Niño in 100 years produced heavy flooding in coastal cities, destroying roads and irrigation systems, while drought in the mountains killed thousands of animals. The Andes Mountains stretch from Colombia to Chile, creating three distinct geographic areas: the coast, the Sierra Mountains, and the Selva tropical rainforest. The costa is the narrow strip of land bordered by the Pacific Ocean to the west. One of the driest deserts in the world, it is crossed by many rivers that run down from the mountains and can be harnessed for irrigation. The western slope of the Sierra is extremely dry. Between two mountain slopes lies the Altiplano, a dry, high-altitude plain in southern Peru and northern Bolivia. Areas at altitudes above 10,000 feet are called highlands. The eastern slopes of the Andes, called the Ceja de Selva, eyebrow of the rainforest, enjoy warmer, humid weather. The eastern slopes of the Andes have a monte cloud forest environment due to a cool, misty climate that supports thick, low vegetation. To the east lies the Selva, the beginning of the Amazonian rainforest. Although the rugged Andes Mountains create extreme weather conditions and make transportation difficult, they have hidden advantages that Andean people have learned to exploit. The difference in altitude between the peaks and valley bottoms can be as great as 10,000 feet, almost 2 miles, and creating a wide variations in temperature and rainfall at different altitudes. The varying topography of the mountains creates a variety of ecological niches, which are zones stacked one on top of another where different types of animals and plants can survive. So instead of having to travel hundreds of miles to arrive in a different climate, the Andean people can walk as little as 60 miles to go from a tropical forest in the lowlands to the frozen tundra of the highlands. An Andean family group might make its base in the temperature Quechua zone located in the highlands, where family members would grow maize, beans, garden vegetables, quinoa, a high-protein grain that we are very familiar with now, potatoes, and Asian grains such as wheat and barley. Some family members descend to the Ceja de Selva on the eastern slopes of the Andes to tend the fields of maize, cocoa, fruit, pepper, and other staples. They could descend farther into the plains of the Amazon forest to cultivate manioc, a root crop. They also maintain herds of llamas and alpaca in the higher pasture lands. Plants with differing planting and harvesting times can be grown at different altitudes. Various plots of land farmed by one family group might be 2 or 3 days apart by foot. This system, called a vertical economy, had many advantages in the harsh Andean climate. First, it gave a community access to a wide variety of foods and other products. Second, it protects them against the impact of harsh and unpredictable weather conditions. If frost or drought destroys the crop at one elevation, the community can fall back on the harvest in another ecological niche. Andean farmers also plant several, sometimes dozens of varieties of one crop, like potatoes, in a single field, so that at least some plants will survive the season's unpredictable temperature and rainfall. The Andean people developed a technique for food storage that actually turned their harsh environment into an asset. Living at altitudes of about 2 miles above sea level, they had many as 300 nights of frost and heat coming from strong sunlight during the day. They used this combination of hot and cold to freeze dry meat and potatoes that were left outside to alternately freeze and dry over a long period of time. The Incas called the dried meat charqui. It lent its name to the dried meat that we called jerky. Andean people also made chuno by softening potatoes in water and leaving them outside to freeze at night. During the day, they dried in the hot sun. The freeze-dried foods could be stored in warehouses for several years, used during periods of drought or other natural disasters. The ability to store food was crucial since frequent frost, hail, and drought often led to crop failures in 2 or 3 years out of 4. So freeze-dried food is almost like that's what astronauts take to space, and it's also what are in the meals ready to eat that our military uses when they're out in the fields during combat. People living in the lands of extremes have devised different ways of using the region's resources. Scientists now believe that the first people probably arrived in South America from the north between 1200 and 1500 years ago. Excuse me, let me try that again. 12,000 and 15,000 years ago. For thousands of years, people hunted game and gathered wild foods. Between about 8,000 and 3,000 BC, some groups gradually began to supplement their diets by planting some crops. Over time, farmers developed many new plant varieties by selecting wild plants with desired traits, planting and cultivating them, and using some of the seeds the following year. This process was repeated over a period of several hundred years until a new plant variety was created. Highland people developed a variety of grains and tubers, such as the potato, that could survive in the dry, high-altitude climate. Other plants, such as peanuts, beans, squash, sweet potatoes, and manioc, were cultivated along the coast. And many of these foods that I just mentioned, potatoes in particular, and maize or corn, are very unique to the Americas. They did not exist in other parts of the world until after Columbus. The first villages appeared on the seacoast between 5700 and 3000 BC. The people obtained almost all of their protein from the fish and shellfish they caught in the sea. In about 4000 BC, maize or corn was introduced to Peru from Mexico, but it remained a minor part of the diet for many millennia. Eventually, corn came to play a very important role in the Andean culture, both as a food and as a base of chica, a beer used in religious rituals. People of the Andes also grew the cocoa plant. They chewed its leaves and made cocoa tea to deaden hunger pangs, relieve the effects of altitude sickness, and provide necessary vitamins and minerals. The plant was so important to the Andean people that it was used in religious rituals and sacrificed to the gods. Coca was originally used in Coca-Cola. Today, coca plants are still grown legally in the Andes region for chewing and herbal tea. Coca is also grown to make cocaine, an illegal narcotic drug that causes serious problems throughout the world. By 2500 BC, the Andean people had fully domesticated the llama and alpaca, two animals related to the camel that are used for wool, fuel, meat, and transport. Beginning at about 2500 BC, a coastal and highland people developed irrigation systems to increase agricultural yields. People living in the coastal desert regions built elaborate irrigation systems to harness the many rivers that flowed from the mountains to the sea. Between about 1800 and 800 BC, the people of the highlands began building terraces to create flat areas for fields and prevent rainfall, runoff, and soil erosion. Also during this period, craftsmen began working with gold and copper, and people began using looms to weave cloth from llama and alpaca wool. The Andean people started making ceramics or pottery in about 1800 BC, about 2,000 years after it appeared in Ecuador and Colombia. Who were the Inca? Before the Inca Empire united the central Andes region, the area was divided into a multitude of political and language groups, which were often limited to a single river valley. Scientists working in Peru have determined that the Incas originated in the Cusco Valley sometime around 1000 AD. Because they had no written language, the Inca left no written record of their history. They transmitted their history orally, and it is difficult for historians to determine how much of their stories are legend and how much is based on actual events. Some versions of Inca oral history list the names of 13 Inca emperors, but the first 6 were probably mythical. Between AD 1200 and 1438, the Incas gradually became the dominant group in the Cusco area. Wiracocha Inca started to expand Inca territory in the Cusco region by force. In 1438, a neighboring tribe, the Conchas, attacked the Incas. Wiracocha and his son, Urcon, fled the invaders, but another son, Inca Yupanqui, sorry about my pronunciation, rallied some of the Inca soldiers and appealed to the surrounding tribes to defend Cusco. When only a few soldiers responded to his call to arms, he asked the earth for help and cried out that even the stones scattered around the city were turning into warriors to help his cause. After the Incas captured the Chanca stone idol, many wavering warriors joined the Yanquis army, and he defeated the Chanca. When Huirachocha named Yurkan as emperor, the Inca nobles rebelled, forcing Huirachocha to give up his throne. The prince became emperor, or Sapa Inca, and changed his name to Pachacuti, which means earthquake, or he who transform in their native tongue. Pachacuti lived up to his new name by leveling Cusco and rebuilding it into an imperial capital. He reorganized the Inca religion, making Inti, the sun god, the most important Inca god, and establishing the worship of Huiracocha, the creator god. He built the Coricancha, the temple dedicated to the Inti that awed the Spanish conquistadors. Pachacuti conquered the densely populated region around Lake Titicaca. His son extended Inca control as far north as Ecuador and took over the coastal and high regions of Peru. In 1471, the son became the emperor, taking the name Topa Inca, and continued to extend the empire south into central Chile. He conquered large areas of what is now Bolivia and parts of present-day Argentina. Capac, Topa's Inca son, became emperor in 1493. He extended the emperor's borders to southern Colombia and added some jungle area in eastern Peru. By 1527, the empire extended 3,416 miles along the Andes. After governing for almost 35 years, Capac died suddenly. Historians think he died of smallpox, which was introduced by the Spaniards to the New World and spread like wildfire among the Native Americans, who lacked immunity to European diseases. In fact, European diseases spread so quickly among Native Americans that they traveled throughout the New World even faster than the Europeans did. Capac died without naming an heir. Two of his sons, Huascar and Atahualpa, I used to know how to say this, Atahualpa, fought each other for the throne in just a civil war that lasted 5 years. The Spanish arrived on the coast at just about the time that Atahualpa's forces defeated Oscar. An empire is a government that controls huge territory and millions of people. It usually encompasses many different ethnic groups. Empires usually gain control over other areas by military force, but control can also be economic or political. The leaders of empires need to develop certain mechanisms to exert control over their vast territory, such as a road system, a common language, an administrative system, and an army. So this should sound familiar to you. So I want you to pay particular attention at this point in the video, because we're going to be using these notes in class for our lesson. One reason that the Inca Empire ran smoothly is that the Inca rulers took traditions that already existed in the Andes region and altered them to serve the administration in the Inca state. For example, a road system had already been built by previous civilizations in various parts of the Inca Empire. The Inca emperors expanded it so that it connected the entire empire. Inca emperors also used the traditional mita system of sharing labor as the basis for obtaining labor services from all households. The basic unit of society in the Andean highlands was the Alayu, a group of related families who traced their origins back to a common ancestor and were responsible for honoring him by providing ritual offerings. People were expected to marry someone from their own Alayu. And Alayu members shared land and exchanged labor throughout the agricultural year. For example, members of an Alayu would work together to plow and plant fields, take care of llama herds, build a house, and maintain irrigation canals. Alayu members helped each other. If one member of Alayu was called to serve in the army for several months, other members would perform his work. Strict accounting was involved. If someone performed a job for another Alayu member, he or she would expect the equal amount of labor in return. Payment could be the same service, for example, plowing 5 rows in a field, or giving a textile that took someone the same number of hours to make. Food was also used to repay somebody for work performed. Alayu members shared land and exchanged labor throughout the agricultural year. For example, members of an Alayu would work together to plow and plant fields, take care of llama herds, build a house, and maintain irrigation canals. Alayu members helped each other. If one member of an Alayu was called to serve in the army for several months, other members would perform his work. I'm sorry, I'm just noticing I just read this slide. Disregard. The Inca Empire was organized in a strict hierarchy, starting with the emperor and reaching all the way down to individual households. The Sapa Inca, or ultimate Inca, had complete power. He was considered a descendant of the sun god. The empire was divided into 4 quarters, and a close relative of the emperor was Lord Apu of each quarter. The 4 Apus made up the Supreme Council, which advised the Sapa Inca on important matters. Royal governors, usually but not always Incas, headed each of the provinces, which often encompassed a single ethnic group. The empire contained over 80 provinces at its peak. Each province had a hierarchy of Caracas, who were responsible for between 100 and 10,000 households. The Caracas appointed foremen, who were in charge of between 10 and 50 tax-paying households. The Caracas carried out many tasks vital to the running of the empire. They determined how much land a household needed each year to support itself based on the number of people in the family and how much the family owed in amita labor and agricultural products. The Caracas were responsible for collecting what is owed and seeing that it was stored properly. Caracas were in charge of managing and values resources and resolving quarrels and maintaining the community's well-being. If a disaster occurred, the Caraca was held responsible. One Caraca was put to death when a devastating El Niño destroyed his Ayu's territory. Caracas were expected to be generous and provide Ayu members with food and chica during festivals. That's the beer. Caracas appointed the Inca were often former leaders of conquered groups. The position became hereditary, so sons of Caracas were sent to Cusco to be trained, returned to the home province, and became Caracas. Usually Caracas were men, but women could also perform the role. The Inca rulers realized that to govern a huge empire, they needed a common language. So they made their tongue, Quechua, the official language of the empire. But local groups could use their own language for daily activities. The Inca rulers needed a system of communicating with all parts of the empire. So they expanded the existing roads into an elaborate system that ran through the empire. The road system was only over 25,000 miles long. One road ran along the coast, another lay inland along the Andes Mountains. Bridges crossed broad rivers as well as rushing streams that cut through the deep mountain valleys. The shorter roads linked the 2 main roads. The road system was used almost entirely by people on official business. The Inca emperor and his court examining the realm, caravans of llama herders and transporting goods to be housed in storehouses, soldiers marching to put down an uprising in a rebellious province or on official business, and runners delivering messages. Ordinary people could use the roads only if granted official permission. Runners, called chasquis, lived in small huts that were built every 4 to 6 miles along the road. The messengers would run to the next way station, shouting the message to the next chasqui. Messages could travel about 150 miles a day in this manner. The messengers probably carried quipis to assure that their messages did not get distorted by frequent repetition. Chasquis also carried goods to the emperor, bringing fish from the coast to Cusco in just 2 days. Inca armies used the roads in time of war to move quickly into battle. Storehouses built along the way held weapons and supplies, including lances and darts, dried food, blankets, and even sandals for soldiers to use in time of war. If crops failed in one area, food was distributed to local residents from the warehouses. The local community was expected to refill the storage houses when crops were plentiful. Our government is financed by taxes that all working people pay, but the Inca government did not use money. How was their complex government supported? The Inca emperor owned all the land in the empire. Agricultural land in each community was divided into 3 parts. Local farmers worked all the land, but they were allowed to keep only the products from one portion of the fields. The other 2 portions of the agriculture yield went to support the Inca's religious leaders and the Inca government. Herds of llamas and alpacas were divided up into a similar manner. One part of the wool went to the emperor, one part to the priests, and the local community was entitled to keep the wool from the community herds. The exact proportion of each group received depended on the local needs. The land along the Pacific coast in the highlands is dry and requires irrigation to produce reliable crop yields. People living in the arid deserts along the coast had built elaborate irrigation systems to harness the many rivers that flowed from the mountains into the ocean. The Incas expanded the system to make it more productive. In the highlands, farmers had long built terraces, that was the picture in the previous slide, to create more surface area for farming. Terracing involves building large retaining walls on a mountain slope and filling in the space between the wall and the slope above with soil. They look like steps. Terracing prevents soil erosion and rainfall runoff. Channels divert spring water and streams of water to the tiny fields. Farmers had been terracing the slopes of the Andes for centuries, but the Inca greatly expanded the amount of agricultural land by building terraces and conquered lands throughout the Andes. At the height of the Inca Empire, about 2.47 million acres of irrigated terraces were in cultivation. Andean farmers still use some of these terraces today, but many have fallen into ruin. Building terraces, irrigation systems, and road requires a high level of workers to carry out these major engineering projects. The Mita system. As we have seen, the Incas did not have money, and so the government could not collect taxes as we know them. Instead, Inca administrators required adult men to work for the state in a certain number of days per year. This system is called the Mita system. As soon as a man married, he became the head of a household and was obligated to perform Mita work. Each person was assigned a specific job according to his skills. For example, a skilled weaver would be assigned to make cloth. A fast runner would be assigned to be a chasqui runner. The foot soldiers in the Inca army were farmers who were serving their Mita labor obligation. Pachacuti rebuilt Cusco by calling 30,000 men to contribute Mita labor. Both women and men were required to weave a certain amount of cloth for the state each year. Other activities carried out with the Mita labor included farming, mining, road and bridge building, building temples and other public monuments, transportation of goods, building canals, terraces, and irrigation systems, and making pottery and metalwork. Some ethnic groups were considered to be especially skilled at certain tasks, and these were therefore assigned to them. For example, one group was thought to be especially good at carrying litters, a sort of platform on railings used to carry important people. Others were gifted stonemasons, dancers, or warriors. Some groups were considered good for nothing, but they were assigned Mita work anyway. One group was required to gather reeds from another, and another turn into a basket of live lice every 4 months. Ew. Although every man was expected to contribute work every year for the empire, only a few men in a village would be called to work at one time so that other family members could take over their work at home. The length of time a person was expected to do Mita work varied according to the task assigned, but usually lasted no more than 2 or 3 months per year. The person assigned to a specific task could get family members to help him in order to make the length of Mita service shorter, so it was beneficial to have a large family. Although Mita work was required, it probably resented by non-Inca ethnic groups who became incorporated into the empire. It really was an extension of the Andean custom of each individual working for the group. Now each head of household was performing labor for a certain period of time for the Inca state. Workers and their families received something in return for their labor that they contributed to the state. Both Caracas and the Inca Emperor hosted festivals periodically in which they gave food and drink to everyone in the community. These festivals were rewards after workers had completed plowing, planting, harvest, and canal cleaning chores. The emperor also gave textiles and metal objects as an expression of generosity to symbolize his gratitude for Mita labor. For example, soldiers received blankets. The Inca Empire also employed full-time skilled craftsmen to produce luxury textiles, elegant pottery, and exquisite objects of gold and silver. The emperor gave away these luxury goods to leaders of conquered people, to members of the Inca nobility, and to Inca religious leaders. They were also placed in the graves of important people. Quipi. The Inca ruler and his administrators needed detailed information on what was happening in all parts of the empire. They needed to know how many people were living in each province, how much each province was producing, and how much it owed the government in agricultural products and Mita labor. How did the Inca bureaucrats keep all records of this important information if they did not have it in writing? The Inca usually had it use an ingenious tool, that had been developed by an earlier civilization in the region for keeping track of all kinds of information. The object called a quipi is simply a long string held horizontally with shorter strings of many colors tied to it. See below. Each of these threads can have other threads tied to it. The threads have different types of knots to represent the numbers 0 to 9. For example, a knot representing the number 6 tied at 4 inches on a 10-inch string would represent 6,000. Its position at 4 inches from the main string would be read as the thousands column. Quipis could not be used to add, subtract, or multiply. Specially trained administrators called Quipi Mayox learned to read the quipis. They used stones and counting trays similar to the abacus for doing calculations and then transferred the information back to the quipi. The quipu was used to record all sorts of information, from the number of births and deaths in a province to the number of llamas and alpacas in a village herd, the amount of corn stowed in a storehouse, and the amount of gold produced in a province, or the amount of meat of textiles a community owed. Colored strings represented different things. For example, a yellow string might represent gold, a white string silver. The quipu was also used to record historical events and legends and could be used to represent ideas. For example, white might represent peace and red, war. The quipu was lightweight and compact and could be easily carried by chasquis runners. Reading a quipu was difficult. Quipu May-Ox spent many years learning to read and interpret the quipu. They worked in every provincial capital collecting and recording important information about the province. They would send regular reports back to the emperor in Cusco. He and his advisors then decided how much the province owed in agricultural products and meat of service. Being a Quipumayoc was often hereditary, with quipu readers passing their skills down to their sons. Sons of Inca nobility and provincial rulers learned to read the quipu at school in Cusco. The complex system for collecting information collapsed after the Spanish conquest. When the Spaniards saw the Incas using the quipu, they had little understanding of its meaning. They often destroyed them, thinking they were ungodly. All we know about what information the quipus contained is from early trials in which Quipumayocs interpreted quipus, and Spanish court officials copied down what was the Quipumayoc said. But these quipus were not preserved, so the secret of deciphering the quipu died with the last Quipumayoc. Although scholars have studied the quipu extensively, no one can decipher a quipu with certainty today. Some Andean herders still use a simplified version of the quipu to keep track of their llama herds. It's less complex than the quipus used during the Inca times, with fewer chords, types of knots, and colors. Perhaps because they lived in a harsh and unpredictable environment, the Inca practiced religious rituals designed to win the favor of the gods, who were often associated with natural forces such as the sun, water, or weather. The Inca people gave precious things to the gods to earn their favor. The Inca religion grew out of the beliefs of the Andean people regarding natural forces. The Andean people have long worshipped the natural world around them, including mountains, rivers, lakes, the ocean, and constellations, or the stars. They identified natural features such as especially high mountains, springs, and large stones as sacred places called huacas. The Inca worshipped the sun as the ultimate giver of life and to celebrate festivals to ensure the sun will continue to appear each day. They used felines and snakes, felines are cats, as symbols in their religious art. Pachacuti reorganized the Inca religion. He created a special relationship between himself and the sun, proclaiming that the Inca emperor was the sun's son. Pachacuti built the elaborate temple of the sun of Cusco that awaited the Spanish. Huaracocha was the god of creation who was believed to have created all things, including the sun, moon, and stars, as well as the earth and human beings. The Inca people believed that Ilapa, the thunder or weather god, controlled rain. He was asked to provide enough rainfall at the critical points during the agricultural cycle. Mama Kia, the moon god, was the wife of the sun. The festival of the moon was held near the spring equinox at the beginning of the planting season. Pachamama, the sun, the god of the earth, and Mama Cocha, the god of the sea, were also female gods. Many other local deities existed to protect the herds of llamas, wild animals, and crops. Andean people also considered the bodies of dead people to be sacred. The bodies of the Inca emperors were mummified after death. The mummies were brought out for display during festivals and given things to eat and drink. Founding ancestors of Ayus were also mummified. Ayu members were honored them by displaying them during festivals and providing them with ritual offerings, including food and chica. A large group of male and female priests worshipped the many gods and maintained their shrines. The highest priest, usually the brother or uncle of the emperor, worshipped the sun. A group of women called Aquacuna made textiles and chica for the temples. The priests and attendants of Inca gods were supported by agricultural goods produced by the portion of the land under the Inca control. Major festivals took place in December and the beginning of rainy season and included dancing, drinking, and sacrifice. Another important festival occurred in May to celebrate the corn harvest. Many llamas were sacrificed and the meat was either eaten or burned. In June, a festival to the sun god, Inti, took place near Cusco. Only royal Inca men could participate. The festival included llama sacrifices, dancing, and drinking. Chica. The Inca beliefs required people to observe many rituals tied to the agricultural calendar. These rituals involved the sacrifice of precious objects, including textiles, coca, chica, and llamas. Children were sacrificed only on rare occasions after natural disasters, war, or during the crowning of a new emperor. Because the Incas had no written language, scholars studying them had to rely on other sources of information. These include reports made by Spanish observers who conquered the Incas, archaeological remains left by the Inca people, such as buildings, pottery, textiles, tools, metal objects, and burial sites, and studies of people living in the Andes who still practice some Inca traditions today. Each source of information has biases or other limitations. Biases arrive from the observer's opinions or points of view. The Spanish officials, soldiers, and priests were biased in their reporting of Inca life because they wanted to justify their conquest of the Inca. Most portrayed the Indian religion as unfavorably, and some exaggerated the scope of human sacrifice. Early Spanish observers often misunderstood the Andean culture and language. For example, they called the Incas' language Quechua, which was the Inca word for highland valley. The Incas called their language Runa Simi, or human speech. After the Spanish conquest, some people with Inca heritage learned to write Spanish, and several wrote accounts of life during Inca times. But these accounts were also biased in that they may have portrayed Inca rulers as more just and powerful than they actually were. These individuals also tried to use their accounts to increase their personal status. They were also Catholic, so they were often critical of the Inca religion. Archaeologists have studied the physical remains of the Inca culture extensively. They have reconstructed the elaborate road system, examined grave sites to learn about the burial customs and religious beliefs, and studied Inca crafts such as pottery, metal objects, textiles. They have also excavated Inca cities to learn about how people lived. This source of information, while valuable, is incomplete. The Spanish destroyed much of the Incas' treasure when they conquered the Inca Empire. For example, they melted down practically all of the precious gold and silver objects made by the Inca craftsmen and sent it back to Spain. Over the centuries, people have looked at the graves of Inca and other Andean people, leaving little behind for archaeologists to examine. As we have seen, some artifacts like the quipu are indecipherable, since the ability to read the quipu died with the last quipu Mayoc. Many important objects, such as textiles and things made of wood, rot in humid climates. In addition, many aspects of Inca life are left no physical record. Religious beliefs and legends, while very important to Inca culture, cannot be learned about solely from the physical objects that have survived until today. The Inca Empire was one of the most highly developed civilizations of its time. Unlike the Roman Empire, which at its peak, when it was conquered by outsiders with superior weapons and the horse, which gave them an advantage on the battlefield, European diseases introduced by the Spanish decimated the Inca people even before the invaders arrived on their shores. The Inca culture is of interest to scholars because its leaders developed a highly organized state that ruled over millions of people living in a vast territory without the aid of money, riding in the wheel. By building on the indigenous institutions such as the Ayu, Mita labor, and the Quipu, and the vertical economy, Inca rulers controlled a vast empire and managed to provide basic shelter and food for millions of people in an environment of harsh extremes. Okay. So we're going to go to Canvas now. We're going to answer the question on Canvas. What techniques have Andean people developed to take advantage of their extreme environment? And please include details from this lesson.